I like challenges. I always write in third person. Things change. Showing this entire process. Stephen Malhead does this superbly. Rick Riordan does this. Terry Brooks does this. George R. R. Martin does this. The point of view they're doing, you have no clue. If it doesn't happen to the character, if the character doesn't see it, if the character doesn't hear it, you don't know what's going on in the rest.
What's up, everyone? Hi, welcome to the Cozy Book Nook on the Zoom portion. My name is Christina Goebel. I love Golden Heart, and my co-host here is Laban M'mbololo, Esquire, and he is inspired by Laban. Those are both our X handles, and we created the Cozy Book Nook for authors to help you develop your author's platform. Your author platform will include not just your book, but your social media, your speaking performances, website, and everything else that goes with being an author. And we're trying to get people to expand their vision of that, because we wanted to have J.D. Edwards on the show. We wanted him to be our first guest because he's done something really unique. Is he, through the process of being rejected, as many authors are, he developed a formula, secret tricks, if you will, for how to make your book more marketable for traditional publishing. And so a lot of people, they go into self-publishing because they can't figure out that formula for the traditional publishing route. It's not that you're not a good writer. It may not even be the query letter itself. There are a lot of factors involved in the communication process that, get you ready for traditional publishing. So, Laban, could you share with us J.D.'s biography?
J.D. Edwards is the award-winning author of the Fairy Chronicles, several other series. Since 2012, J.D. has published, over 60 genealogical articles internationally, winning over a dozen historical writing competitions. Can you imagine that? His future projects include historical fiction and epic fantasy novel. J.D., welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're certainly welcome to have you. Laban, we were quite excited to have JD here. Before we interview him, do we know what really makes a book viable for traditional publishers? Is this a knowledge that we need? And I wanted to ask that before he speaks, because I just want us to put into place the value of what he's sharing. Do we know right now, if I ask you, Laban, what makes a book viable for traditional publishing? Can you answer that?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think it has to start with a very compelling hook, which in itself has a unique concept. Apart from that, the publishers will invest in books they believe that will sell and will sell very well. So I think those are some of the things that, they ought to get considered by traditional publishers, including, it being well written, very professionally edited, and, having a solid kind of storyline.
Okay, so now we're going to leave that over to JD. And so we'll just remember to mute while people are speaking, especially while he's speaking. And we'll make sure that we can hear what he has to say. Hi, JD. Would you introduce yourself and your books and share what made you decide to crack the code regarding what traditional publishers want?
Sure. So as you know, I'm J.D. Edwards. I started writing fantasy in 2003. And when I completed it, it took me 6 years to get it done. It was a mess, but I thought it was gold because everybody I talked to would lie to me. They wanted to spare my feelings. And while I appreciated that a little bit, I'd rather people be honest with me and tell me, what's wrong with it, because I was under the impression that I'd written a masterpiece, and I look at it now and it was just laughable. But since writing the Fairy Chronicles, which is a 4-book series, I've written sci-fi novels. I've got a historical fiction. I've written horror and horror poetry, self-help, and just all sorts of stuff. But fantasy is where my heart lies. So that's what I'm working on right now. Is actually a romantasy. It's my first step of tipping my toe in the waters of romance, and that's after helping Shanae with her last page book. I thought, I'm going to give this a try. So that's what I'm going to do.
So I also love fantasy. I write fantasy, and there's a little bit, I guess, of the soft romance in some fantasy. And then as you transition into science fiction fantasy, that is when the romance starts dropping off, right? And it starts going more towards that intellectual side.
Yeah.
And I think we all have both of that. Those of us who write in the science fiction and fantasy genre, we have both aspects. What's our future, right? In the speculative fiction. So, and you went into genealogy and things like that as well, and I find that fascinating. But you told us before that you were really daunted by the rejection process. And I think for many authors, that's a big moment. I know for Stephen King, it's a big moment. I think it's a big moment for you. Could you tell us about the rejection?
Yeah, I peddled my book. I'll say it that way, for 3 years, and that a lot of times that started in, I guess it was 6 years before I finally found a publisher. From 2006 to 2012, I did it for 3 years, doing the conventional method where you write a letter to the editors, you write a letter to the publisher, you send them you fax them a query letter. The things like this, a lot of the younger people don't understand what I'm talking about. A fax machine where you actually type in a phone number and send an image. But anyway, that's how I did it, old school. And I would receive rejection letters, but they weren't as fast as I received once I started using email. Then the rejection letters started piling up. And I did not have a good hook. I did not have a good query letter. And those that did take a chance on me, when they started reading my book, they would say, well, let me see the first 3 pages. Let me see the first chapter. And I couldn't understand how they could find out anything about the book just from 3 pages or just from a single chapter. I couldn't understand it, but I ended up racking up 137 rejections before I figured out what I was doing wrong. And that was over between 2006 and 2012. Finally, I figured out what I was doing wrong and fixed it, started getting more queries accepted, but then the book continued to get rejected. And finally, I ended up having to change my voice. Thankfully, a few of these rejection letters actually gave me good advice. One person told me, your book is, the first critic was George R. Martin. He told me that my characters were flat and boring. My story was predictable. He really tore it apart. But he told me, he says, never create a character unwilling to kill. And he says, because if your characters are safe, why read the book? You know the hero is going to survive at the end. You know the bad guy is going to be put down. He says, there's no adventure to it. There's no mystery or mystique. He says, I want to be edge of my seat, hoping the hero is going to win, but knowing that he may not. It's like, well, okay. So that was my first rewrite. The second one, they told me I was writing it in an omniscient view, and they could tell everything that every character was feeling and thinking, and that it wasn't allowing them to connect with the characters or be involved in the story. And one of the things I like to do is have people get sucked into my world. I want them to feel like when they're reading the book that they're actually a part of the fairy kingdom, that they're following along on the adventure with the hero. So that was another rewrite. Another time was when I found out I discovered what I was doing wrong, and this is with the editing process. That was the third rewrite. And then when I found a publisher, of course, they wanted to rewrite it again, but that was more to add lipstick to it, add chapter titles, make it pretty, and stuff like that. But the major rewrite with the editing process was the third rewrite.
You touched on a lot of things there. One thing that immediately caught my attention is the omniscient point of view. Kind of breaking it down for the audience a little bit, the omniscient point of view is kind of like your God. And so when you're writing that way and you let them see into the minds of your characters, sometimes I could see where you might not let them see deeply enough because you're trying to get in everybody's mind a little bit. And so I think they were trying to let your readers see the world through the eyes of a particular character. Is that what they were asking for?
Yeah, they wanted you. They used it as third person. Your main writing point of views are either going to be third person or first person. I always write in third person. I'm going to write a historical fiction in first person, but I haven't done that yet. That's going to be a neat challenge for me. I like challenges. But anyway, third person omniscient, and I changed to third person rotated, which is different than just plain third person. Third person point of view is you only follow the thoughts and sight and everything that single point of view is experiencing. Stephen Lawhead does this superbly, right, where if it doesn't happen to the character, if the character doesn't see it, if the character doesn't hear it, you don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. You have no clue. With third person rotated, it follows maybe 2 or 3 main characters. So one chapter will be about one character, another chapter will be about another one, and you'll rotate around in that way. Rick Riordan does this. Terry Brooks does this. George R. R. Martin does this. As you're reading books, you'll kind of pick up on the point of view they're doing. In fact, Rick Riordan will start his chapters out with the character's name so you know exactly what point of view you're reading from. So I really appreciate that, but I didn't use that in my books.
Okay, so this is brilliant. You're getting a chapter and you're just focusing on that character's point of view in the chapter, and it simplifies the process, but it also seems to be a trend. And so I can imagine that literary agents and publishers, when they see something like that, they would feel safe. They would feel like, okay, I've seen this done, and so did it, and so did it, and George R. R. Martin did it, and so yeah, I think it's gonna work. I could see how the familiar would work here. So, Laban, what were you thinking about while he was sharing with us?
What kind of came up for me is this rejection marathon that is being through. 137 rejection letters is a staggering number. And, what I kept on thinking is, what kept him going on. Also, was there a point where, JD, you thought like, maybe I should give up?
There was.
It's kind of, going through my head when you were talking about all this.
It's hard to pick back up from there. And I think that I know that probably a lot of authors who will be watching this broadcast on YouTube and in other places, they will feel something in common with you. They've received rejection letters and maybe they thought, I'll give up on traditional publishing. This is just too hard. The walls are too high. And they start to calculate the math of time. Where's my time going to go? Would I be better served if I just went with self-publishing? But self-publishing is its own mystery to be solved. And so we have a problem as an author. We either have to figure out traditional or we're going to have to figure out self-publishing. And we can't escape the fact that we have to figure out things. So that's why when JD started talking about this, one thing he's saying, 137 rejections, you learn a lot from failure.
Yeah.
That's what you're thinking person. And so and you were telling us you learned about the omniscient, how you were going to do the omniscient limited, and they were calling it a rotational, right? Because you're rotating your characters. And so then, your omniscient point of view is restricted to one character at a time. But what does that look like? Because see, JD, I know that they're going to look at the first couple of pages and they're going to say, I like this or I don't. And they have it or they don't. So how do you begin a book that is going to be traditionally acceptable?
I was very lucky and fortunate, I believe, in those rejection letters to actually get a few of them that gave me advice. A lot of rejection letters, you just get the form rejection letter of, I'm sorry, this book isn't right for me, but don't give up. This may be better for somebody else. Keep writing, blah, blah, blah. The standard boilerplate rejection letter. When people actually take the time to say, hey, I liked the book, but there's so much wrong with it, I don't even know where to start. Here's something that I really found wrong with it. I got 3 of those. That was it. And 137, I got 3, and those 3 changed my life. But to answer Laban's question first, sorry, but how did I not give up? I knew in my heart that this was a good book, and it was a burning passion within me. I just couldn't give up. It was going to get out there somehow, by hook or by crook. I was going to get it out there, and I did think about self-publishing, but at the time I really wanted to, I felt like that was giving up. and I didn't want to give up. So I'm sorry, Christina, what was the other question you asked?
So when you started at the beginning of the book, a lot of literary agents and publishers and so forth, even our readers, they're going to look at the first couple of pages of our book and they're going to determine whether or not they want to read that. And, you know, in the case of the literary agents and the publishers, it's a little more complicated for those guys because they have to say whether or not they want to represent that. There's a little bit more ownership than the reader can put down the book, walk away, and they only lost a few bucks. But the publishers, the literary agents, they're vested. So what makes them vest in you within this first couple of pages? How did you change that formula? But I'm going to begin my novel this way.
Okay, that's the question. Yeah. So that came from a rejection letter. The person told me that my book was predictable again. They said, every fantasy novel I read starts out with a dream. Your prologue is too long. At the time, my prologue was 10 or 11 pages. And it started out where the character was having an adventure, and then it ends with him, oh, it was all just a dream. And that is so predictable in a lot of fantasy novels to start out that way. And, you know, they also said, you know, your prologue needs to be short, 3-4 pages max. You know, other times, another rejection letter I got told me my book was too long. And each time they would say this, you know, I'd get defensive. And that's something you can't do, especially when they're taking time to give you advice. Do not get defensive. You know, take that advice because you're picking up a gold nugget at that point, because people don't give you advice usually. But I took that advice of, you know, my prologue was too long, it was a dream. They said, start out with some adventure or something unpredictable. So I started out with the mage watching my character 10 years earlier and murdering his parents. So the first 3 pages starts out with the murder of my character's parents. Then it jumps to chapter 1, which is 10 years later. And that was something else they told me about our prologue, is that the prologue needs to take place outside of time, outside of the time period, I guess, of the main story. J.K. Rowling did this. You know, The Boy That Lived, her first chapter. That took place, you know, 11 years before chapter 1. You know, when Harry had died and they left him on the doorstep. But her prologue was, you know, 17 pages long, so it was more of a chapter than it was a prologue. But, you know, she did that to great effect, where she started out at one time period and then jumped to another time period. And in my 4th book, I did a prologue. I only did 2 prologues, but the 4th book I did one which took place 6 months prior to where the story began. And then the characters, as they progressed, ended up meeting up to where that prologue happened. You see that in a lot of science fiction movies, where something will happen, they'll say, you know, 48 hours earlier, or something like that. So I took a little bit of that and threw that into the 4th book. But that's how I came up with changing my prologue. I started out with something exciting, something, you know, shocking. I think the first line of the book is, the mage watched with brilliant anticipation, or with white-knuckled anticipation, as a family he longed to murder circled the river bend. That's the first sentence. And I wanted the people who read my query, even if they read the first couple pages, to be like, wow, okay, here's a mage and he's, you know, white-knuckled. You know, it's descriptive, but it also just grabs you and pulls you in.
JD,
yeah,
talk about this breakthrough. I mean, what changed? You know, you get this breakthrough, but what changed between rejection number 1 and acceptance number 138? Was this the book, the page? Was it the timing?
It was my writer's voice. That was another suggestion from a rejection letter. They told me that I needed to find my own voice. They said it sounded a lot like Terry Brooks. I said, well, thank you. I said, he's my favorite author. They said, yeah, but if I wanted to read Terry Brooks, I'd have hired Terry Brooks. You need to have your own voice. That took the wind out of my sails a little bit. I was like, oh, all right. You know, and I got another rejection letter that said my book is too long. And I said, well, J.K. Rowling's, you know, Deathly Hallows was, you know, 1,500 pages, because mine was 1,200 at the time. And they said, well, that's J.K. Rowling. When you have a following like J.K. Rowling, you can write a massive book like that and people will buy it at Walmart. No one's going to buy a 1,200-page book from an unknown author. Okay. So I ended up splitting that book into 2 books. But yeah, it was a lot of the changes came from rejection letters, and finding my voice happened through this editing process. And when I share the editing process with people, I say it's not a rule. You can follow it verbatim if you want, but it's still just the bones of the editing process. You still have to find your own voice and your own style. And Shanae did that with the last page. She took my editing process, kicking and screaming, and finally found it that, hey, this is actually working. And she moved away from it a little bit, but in her own style. And that's what worked for her, was that she rewrote it using this and then kind of massaged it and added her own flair and style to it. And that's what I encourage everybody to do.
So JD, something is coming out here. Is it perseverance which is still key? Or do you think traditional publishing is harder than ever to break into?
Oh, it's harder than ever. Traditional publishing I think it's a dying art form. With Amazon taking up so much of the marketplace, traditional publishers are being more picky than ever about who they choose for representing. I don't think today that they would choose J.R.R. Tolkien as an author if he was brand new, because he has so much telling and omniscient view and everything that traditional publishers hate these days. They wouldn't choose Charles Dickens. They wouldn't choose any of these greats because that's not what they're looking for today. So things change. And, the advice I'm giving, I developed this back in 2018. So it's already 7 years outdated. But I think it's still a good foundation to go from. And then you can massage the book later and tweak it to have your own style to fit with whatever the current trend is that the publishers are looking for. You need a foundation to build from, and this is what the editing process gives people.
So I guess if we analyze this process a little bit, I'm thinking of you working with another author that you mentioned, Shanae Tracy. Couldn't be here for this interview, although she's been in other interviews with you and been highly supportive of you. But you said kicking and screaming.
Yeah, at first.
What are you trying to get her to do that is so difficult?
What I tried to get her to do was remove her adverbs and dialogue tags from her writing, and she did not like doing that. She loves dialogue tags, or she did. I told her to take the dialogue tags and turn them into action, narrative action, and having data dumps, she needed to use dialogue to advance the story. So you're reading the story, and instead of saying, Jack said this and she gasped, well, show her gasping. Show what Jack said. Don't tell us what Jack said. Don't tell us what she's doing. And it's that mindset of changing from showing to telling that was difficult for her. But she got it, and she owns it now. She has her own voice, and I'm proud of her for coming as far as she did. But that was the main thing, is showing versus telling, and removing those dialogue tags and adverbs from narration only, not from the dialogue. Everybody jumps on me for that, but it's from narration only.
Yeah, so I was just editing, I just edited a book not too long ago, and it was called Can You Open My Eyes? And it's a great story. But when I was talking to the 2 authors, Kasai and Monica, one of the things that I noticed when it was coming across to me was there was no dialogue. And I thought, it doesn't sound, there's nothing, it's like when you say something about the father, and the father did this or the father did that. What makes it interesting is what's happening with the dialogue. I mean, that's how you know what the father's thinking, because he's saying stuff. But when that's removed, and you just tell us the story, and you take away the dialogue from that story, then we end up losing that experience. So one of the things that I was explaining to them is like, hey guys, it's like watching a movie. And your book, if it feels like a movie, is going in the right direction now. So can we imagine this being in a movie where we're just watching all this stuff happen and nobody's talking? And of course they're both like, no, people are going to have to be talking there. And so we started to compare that experience. I think film has taught me a lot, because I see especially when I'm writing science fiction fantasy, I see these images in front of my eyes when I'm writing. And so I'm trying to translate that cinematic experience into the writing. You talked about the hook. Your hook was really beautiful. Laban, what did you think about his hook? Could you repeat your hook, JD, and let's talk about it?
The hook was, forgive me if I don't get it verbatim, but I believe it was something in the lines of, the mage watched with white-knuckled anticipation as the family he longed to murder circled the river bend.
Oh, that's a great book.
Yeah,
because you talked about, and I know many coaches say, minimize dialogue tags, he said, she said, that kind of thing. So what do you think? What are some of these techniques that writers can use to convey who is speaking without the tags?
What are some of the techniques? Instead of, it's so hard to explain without my chart, but I did do a PowerPoint presentation showing this entire process. But basically, instead of saying, something happened, and then you say the character said with glee or something like that, right? Because you always say the character said, and then you always add an adjective or an adverb. And removing the adverbs destroys your dialogue tag, really, because then you're just left with he said, she said, he said, she said, which Michael Crichton does all the time. But when you're listening on an audiobook, you just want to stick a pencil in your ear. You get tired of hearing said all the time. It's not invisible in an audiobook. So instead of saying he said gleefully, you add some action before it. Ian cackled with glee, and then you add the quote afterwards. You change the dialogue tag into a narrative sentence. Into a descriptive sentence of some sort, so that when the person's speaking, if it's all part of the same paragraph, the reader automatically knows who the person is that's speaking. And you don't have to tell them who's speaking because you're just showing them now through your narration.
If a man and a woman are talking to each other and it's just us two having the conversation, then you kind of know when the paragraph switches to the next person, if he said something, then right. You can assume she said it when the next person's talking because it's just the two of them. And so I don't always have to say he said, she said, but I could also describe what's going on with that scene. Now, this is particularly relevant, I think, to Laban because he's writing some fiction now, and he was writing a lot of nonfiction. And so what have you discovered, Laban, was more complicated about that process and dialogue? So Laban, when you were writing dialogue, right, and thinking of our audience here, right, when you were writing dialogue, that was more difficult, right, than nonfiction, which is just talking.
I think that's why I, fired that question at JD, because it was resonating with how you kept on telling me, what's the dialogue? There should be more dialogue here. And I'm like, I don't get this, but I kind of see the point. People have to be able to know what's going on. Yeah, they can follow through from the events, showing them, not telling them.
That's really famous in screenplay writing. They say show, don't tell, and they say show, don't tell, and you're good at writing classes and so forth. It's really good advice. You said that you prepared a PowerPoint. I bet we could look through that a little bit, JD. I don't see why not. If you look at the share buttons, let's see if you can share your screen with us.
Let's see. Okay, share. There we go. So I put this together because I'm trying to write a masterclass on Udemy. So this is going to be part of that masterclass. I haven't gotten it completed yet. I've been too busy with other stuff in life. But anyway, so I started out with this, and I start out with step one of my editing process, which is grammar and spell check. You'd be surprised how many people skip this step. They'll spell check it, but they won't run it through a grammar checker. So I'm not going to read everything here verbatim, but run it through a standard spell checker, but then run it through a paid grammar checker. Emphasis on paid. I know people want to go cheap, but you're going to have to put some money into it if you want to succeed, because there's other people who are paying thousands of dollars. So you're going to have to fork out at least 100. Unfortunately, it's just going to take that. Some of these paid grammar checkers have a free trial period, so use that. If you're strapped for cash, find something that has a free trial, and then when that trial ends, find another grammar checker that has another free trial, or just go ahead and pay pay for it on a month-to-month basis versus an entire year. However you want to do it. Usually a year is less money overall, but it is more out of pocket, at the beginning. I chose Grammarly. It's low cost, I think. It integrates with Word, and again, there's another emphasis, local editing. What I did not like about things like AutoCrit is where you had to take your document and upload it to the cloud. I don't want that. There's so much hacking going on out in the world. I don't want my document out of my control. So I refuse to use anything that uploads my document to the cloud. So I chose Grammarly for that. They also have style guides. So you can choose whether you want it to be informal, formal. You can choose the audience, whether it's general, knowledgeable, expert. You can choose whether you want it to be business, creative, academic. There's so many different styles you can choose. And then its grammar checker changes the grammar that it searches for based on that style. So I do general, audience, informal, and then creative for the style in Grammarly. And that allows me to get by with just about everything in dialogue. But in narration, then it picks stuff up and fixes the narration. So like I said, it integrates with Office. There's no risk of your manuscript being stolen, and you can customize it. Also, it doesn't overtax the CPU. One of the other ones, it might be Pro Writing Aid, might have been Word or WordRake. One of those just brought my computer to its knees trying to run it. I think it was WordRake that brought the computer to its knees. It was so CPU intensive. I didn't like that, although it was a great grammar checker.
One point I was in Grammarly's 98th percentile. I mean, I was using it more than 98% of their users. And it almost brought my CPU to its knees. So it's good to know that they have been improving in that. And I just wanted to highlight that you were talking about, you were using general audience, right, as your preferred style.
Yes, general audience. If you make it knowledgeable or expert, it's going to leave in all the big words, but people may not understand it if they're just going to pull your book off the shelf.
Agree.
So the second step was called a deep dive edit. And this is where a lot of people just stop because they don't understand how to do a deep dive edit, and I have to explain it to them. But take the time to read your book aloud or in your head. Now, I know it sounds silly, but when you're reading it aloud, you almost transport yourself out of author mode into reader mode, and that's the mode you need to get into when you're editing. If you're editing it in author mode, you know what you mean, so you don't necessarily change it, for a reader to understand. I focus on every sentence to see if it makes sense in context of the paragraph. The hook I gave you guys, I rewrote that so many times. I lost count how many times I rewrote it, but I rewrote it because I focused on that sentence. I wanted that first sentence to just jump out and grab people. I had different versions of it, and I would ask my friends, okay, which of these sounds better? I really, went to great lengths to make that sentence just pop. And you don't necessarily need to do it with every sentence, but I think in your prologue, you need to make sure that everything is crisp and tight, at least in the first 3 pages if you don't have a prologue, because that's what a lot of agents and publishers are going to ask for. Anyway, so I focused on every sentence to see if it made sense. I read my manuscript as if I was a reader, reading it for the first time, pulling off a shelf, separating myself from the author. That's the next bullet point. And the last one is be your own worst critic. With 137 rejections, I knew what it was like to receive a lot of criticism and rejection. Do that to yourself. It's better to come from a point of love from yourself rather than from a stranger. So, pretend like you're Siskel and Ebert and that you're just picking it apart, or on Mr. Science Theater 3000, just tearing the thing apart. Do that to your own work. You know what you mean to say. Make sure that sentiment is conveyed to the reader. I work in IT, so I use the word user loosely.
Yeah, it happens. I was thinking as you were sharing this that y'all must apologize for saying take time to read your book aloud. This is something that I will not fail to do in my edit. I not only do I read it aloud, I read it aloud with another person so that they can help me catch any errors. So it's a big event in my life where I'm going to pick another person to read it with me, and we're going to read it aloud and experience it aloud. And I think that is essential in an edit. And the other thing you said, separate yourself from the work. It's pretty common among experienced writers where we just say, okay, I'm going to finish my novel and I'm going to wait a week or so, and then I'm going going to come back to it with fresh eyes because you've separated yourself, you've taken that space. But on the other hand, especially with writing fantasy, because we were talking about writing fantasy and because I made a huge mistake while writing fantasy, a lot of times you're writing world building. I don't recommend that you ever leave that world building. I mean, stick with the novel until you finish it and then take your break. But taking the break when you're doing world building takes you out of that world. And it's kind of like the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's a little hard to get back into that world and back into Narnia, so to speak. So try not to take too long of a break during writing, but after writing, I think it's really important.
If you take too long of a break, you could end up like George R. Martin, 16 years later, still not finish your last book.
It could happen.
Laban, you're going to say something?
Yeah, sure. I was kind of asking, at what stage should an author consider a deep dive, a deep edit? Is it before the beta readers or after?
Oh, yeah. Beta reader is your last step. There's a lot to do before you find a beta reader. And that's in my 12-point step here. I'll go to the next one. Remove adverbs from narration. Again, I emphasize the from narration because of how much I get beat up on this step. The adverbs are weak and they tend to tell the reader what's happening rather than show the reader what's happening. How do you know what an adverb is? Well, typically it ends in ly. Not always, but like always is an adverb. But it's on my editing list of words to take out if it's not ending in an ly. And yes, I do have a list. Adverbs tend to slow down a story rather than enhance it. It allows you to replace your dialogue tags and to show who's speaking rather than telling who's speaking. And I went over that. Dialogue tags are not, like you said, are not invisible, especially in audiobook. I left out the pencil in your ear part, but I'll never listen to another Crichton book in audio form. I'll read his books, but I will not listen to them.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad. But likewise, using very, I always try to point out to people that I'm editing for because it comes across. If I use very all the time, what would make my writing original disappears. Because all that anybody could see is that you said very, they were very sad, they were very this, they were very that. And people just focus on the overuse of work.
Yeah. I actually have a chart. I didn't write it myself. I got it from another site, but it was over 100 ways to remove the word very and replace it with another word because I had the same problem. But with one of the ways you can remove these words is for adverbs. I call them weak verbs. Their state of being. So the man was looking at the bird. Now notice was looking, that's in past tense, that's also passive voice. So the man gazed at the bird. So yes, you're changing the tense from past tense to present tense, but you're also making it an active voice. So here's a present tense. Jim is a lover of country living, or more powerful, Jim treasures country living. So you're taking that is a lover and you're changing that to what I call a power verb, something that is, when you see that word or read that word, it evokes something in you. It triggers something in your imagination. You associate something with treasuring something. So Jim treasures country living, you automatically think of things that you treasure. And that's how you associate that word then with the action. The next one, there's 3 things that make me feel the way I do about you. Or 3 things convince me to follow my heart with you. You're telling them in this way, the second way, you know how they feel. The first way says 3 ways that make me feel the way I do. Well, what's that? Love you, hate you, what's the way? You don't know because it's very ambiguous. So using the next way, it's 3 things convince me rather than make me feel. Convince me to follow my heart with you. So that tells the reader then that, okay, they do like the person, perhaps even love the person, and they're following their heart. They're committed to them. When you follow your heart with something, again, this goes back to touching the reader and having the reader associate different words and power verbs with different actions. And the last one, the hunters were skinning their deer. Okay, past tense, you change again. The hunters field dress their deer. Now, that's really the same thing. Field dressing is maybe taking the guts out versus skinning. So there's a little ambiguation in there. But you see it's more active, it's more descriptive.
It's more stylistic. Look at the difference in that last sentence. The hunters were skinning their deer, which sounds normal. Anybody could have said it. But when you change it to the hunters field dress their deer, there are not many people who would say it that way. So as you start being more specific with your verbs and taking out the to be verbs, am, is, are, was, were, to be and all this and being, and when you take those out, you really get stuck. You're developing your style, which is what they were begging you to do.
Right. Am, is, are, was, be, being, been. take them out.
Absolutely.
The next one are reliance on adverbs. And this is what I was talking about with Shanae and with my own writing at first. I know I bring up Shanae a lot, but when Shanae wrote the last page, I saw so much of my original work in her work as far as the problems. That's what really made me want to keep at it and, get that book fixed for her because, in a way it was, me going back in time and fixing my own work. So I wanted to see if my new process would work on someone who'd, written something so recently. But here's some adverbs. So the fox ran quickly. Notice again the ly. The fox ran quickly through the field. The fox dashed. So instead of ran quickly, you say dashed through the field. You can use any sort of power verb, but that's just the one I chose. She menacingly looked at him. She glared at him. Look, any of the, I call them sight verbs, touch, thought, look, see, hear, smell, any of those senses, you take them out, replace with something else. They're weak and they're adverbs and they don't do anything for your story. So he secretly listened, again, another one of the senses. He secretly listened to their conversation, or he eavesdropped on their conversation. The baby cried incessantly for its mother. The baby wailed for its mother. Again, the incessantly, that's a toss-up. Wailing for its mother isn't necessarily conveying the incessantly. So maybe in that case I would leave incessantly in, or I would change it to something else that conveys that continuous. The baby's continuous wails for its mother grated on my nerves. Something like that is what I would change it to, removing that adverb from the narration. Weak verbs containing ing. Again, this is another way to tell if it's an adverb. A lot of times they'll have an ing because it's following a being verb. And that's a lot of times how I found my being verbs was looking for ing words. So the man was walking on the platform. The man strode along the platform. She was loving the idea of a Hawaiian vacation. She loved the idea of a Hawaiian vacation. Again, you're taking the passive voice and you're changing it to an active voice. The family was starting to gather for their evening meal. The family gathered for the evening meal. The thief was stealing cigarettes. The thief absconded with cigarettes from the store. There's a $10 word for it. I enjoy writing with words that are meaningful and powerful. And these are just a few of the examples of what I did with removing adverbs.
This is great.
The next step, I removed filler words. Filler words or killer words, they kill the momentum of your story. Flowery adjectives, weak verbs, adverbs, passive voice, active voice. We covered that in the last slide. But they can also be superfluous piffle. People who don't know what that means, it's a British phrase I picked up. It just means it's filled with things that aren't necessary to the story. I say it in that way just to be funny, but they're unnecessary additions. Your story is stronger without them, and they don't really add any value at all. When you start removing them and changing them, you realize how much lack of value they actually had. And here's some examples of filler and killer words. Just, very, that's one from your list. Had, that's still my biggest hang-up, is had. I use had way too often. My publisher even brought that up to me recently. They said, man, you still use had a lot. So I know, nobody's perfect, I try my best, but it's hard to write without these things consistently. But over time, you'll develop that skill. Really, quite, stuff. You should stuff. I would never use that, but I guess a lot of people do. We use it in our normal writing, in our normal speaking sometimes, and people tend to write the way they speak, so that gets added in there. Actually, that was a hard one for me. Sort of, all these kind of, out of, in order to, used to. Here's an ly suddenly. So I do that a lot also. Then, so I just have, these are general words to avoid narration. And you can see I have the, you can't see my screen here, but you can see the telling words, which are the sight words, or the, not the sight words, the senses. See, look, hear, taste, smell. All the ways you can do that, and then they're different tenses if the word changes. So see, and the word sees, well, you're looking for the word see, so you'll pick that up. But saw, you wouldn't necessarily pick up if you're looking for the word see. So I made a list of those words that change based on tense. And then I had a lot of filler words. And then your state of being words are at the bottom. One I don't have on here is the word important. That can be overused. I wouldn't necessarily say to take it out, but I would limit its use. Anything that can be overused is bad, even if it's a good word.
Exactly. You should be paying attention to, and this will be specific to the writer, how many times that you are using a word on a page. And so it doesn't even matter what word it is at that point. I wanted to draw a distinction with one word that you had on the previous slide, which was had. And sometimes had is just like he had a bag or he had this or that, but that's the one that we're talking about. That's not very specific. If you think about he had this, what picture do you have in your mind? Not really a picture. So then when you change that word, you get stronger writing. On the other side, sometimes you need had, which is going to be in the past tense, so that you are distinguishing between what happened in the recent past and what happened in the distant past. So I wanted to draw a distinction there so people didn't get confused. So does that sound about right about what you were trying to say?
It does. There are times when had should be used. And that's why I said to limit your use of that word rather than, take it out completely. I know I say remove from narration, not dialogue. I probably should say limit from narration, but if I do that, then people will just limit the use of just or very. Those words need ripped out completely. They should never appear in your book. There are so many other ways to speak without using those two words specifically. So I just include had in my list because for me, that was one of my biggest words I needed to look for. And this list was mainly written for me. This was a 6-month process going through all 12 steps. So it took a while. Now I can do it in a couple of days, but it was originally 6 months.
So is this 12 steps because it's almost like Alcoholics Anonymous and there's a 12-step program to improve yourself, and now we have a 12-step program to be a better writer and to get published? I mean, did you think about that?
No, I didn't actually. This just happens to be how many steps it took for me to make it good. But that is interesting. No, I hadn't thought about it like that. So the next one is what I talked about earlier with Grammarly Premium. And I go into more detail on this slide, like I did before, about the different audience, general rather than knowledgeable or expert, formality, that's what it was, informal rather than neutral, and your domain. I do creative. You can do academic, business, general, technical, or casual. One thing I do need to stress, do not blindly accept the suggestions. Grammarly, like all of them, are powered by AI and they will make mistakes. Don't necessarily trust everything, but take it with a grain of salt, reword it if you have to. If it's finding a problem, a lot of times it is a problem, but you may not want to take their suggestion on how to fix it. Use you're the author, not Grammarly. So write it the way you want, but use this to find the errors and then fix them yourself rather than just taking their suggestion. Now, sometimes their suggestion works. Yeah, okay, I like that. And you just hit accept and go to the next one, especially when you have over 1,000 problems that they find. Usually, when I first started this, it found 1,800 problems, something like that. And I about cried. I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. Like, oh my goodness, it's so bad. I've already spent so much time taking out these adverbs and stuff, but I use stuff. But taking out the adverbs and dialogue tags, and then it found 1,800 problems. But they were actually problems, and it took me a very long time. Like I said, 6 months to go through this because I'd get despondent, and I'd just like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'd shut it off, and I'd ignore it for a couple of weeks, and I'd come back to it. Like, still have 1,800. They didn't go away magically. Sometimes Grammarly would get an update, so then it would find new words that weren't in there originally. So by putting it off, I actually made it worse for myself. But anyway, whenever you choose, whatever program you use it for your entire manuscript before going on to the next step. Don't try and skip the step or say, I'll come back to this, because this is very important before you go to the next step, which, there's the writing goals. This is a screenshot from Grammarly to show you the different settings.
Yeah, I wanted to speak just to that because 1,800 words that you saw come up, I mean, things that to pay attention to, grammar and being depressed. And you said it took you 6 months?
Yeah, process. Yeah.
That's your mental attitude going on there. That's the attitude about it. And so just sharing that, you have relieved so many authors. You will save a whole bunch of authors time, because now they know, hey, it's common. I have 3 writing degrees, guys, and I have, if for a big manuscript, you can expect to have thousands of times when you repeated yourself, or you use too many words, or you use the same adverb. So it's normal. And so just, go with that.
Yeah, it is normal. The next step is something that a lot of people don't do. And this is something I found extremely useful. Listening to your book. Again, you remember me talking about listening to Michael Crichton's book and how I detected the word said so often. It annoyed me. That's because your ears hear things that your eyes miss. You're using a different sense to understand your book, to go through your book. And that different sense can pick up things that you would miss otherwise. So ways to do this. If you have Office 365, it has a read aloud option under accessibility options. If you don't have Office 365 from Word, you can save it as a PDF. If you're using something other than Microsoft product, they all should have a print to PDF option these days. Open your PDF in a web browser or Acrobat Reader. Reader has a read aloud feature for accessibility features. If you're going to use a web browser like Edge or Firefox or something like that, they all have a add-on that you have to find on the internet. So just type in, read aloud add-on for Edge or read aloud add-on for Firefox. What they want you to do then is you have to take your book in PDF form and upload it to their site. Now, it's just a temporary site, so it doesn't keep it. It's not going to get out in the cloud. It's just a temporary place, and it will then read the book to you. You can even choose the voice you like to use. I always use a British female. You don't have to. That's just the most soothing voice that I found that they had. Nowadays, a lot of AI voices are a whole lot better. But, we're talking back 2009, when 2018, I guess, is when I started this process. But still, the AI just wasn't there even 7 years ago. It's really made a lot of advances recently. But not only can it help you find these words, it can help you with your pacing issues and data dumps. And data dumps, it will just kill your story. One thing I told Shanae is if you have more than 3 paragraphs of narration in a row, that's a data dump. So that you're going to lose your reader. When I'm reading a book and I see page and a half, I'm going to pick on one of my favorite authors, Stephen Lawhead here. He'll go on for a page and a half about what people are having for dinner. I don't need that. I don't need to know if you're having a baked potato or mashed potatoes. I really don't care. You ate food. Move on. Let's get to the story. So I'll just flip through the page until we get past all the narration. And usually I'm not missing anything from the story. Sometimes I do, and I'll have to go back and figure out what I'm missing. But for the most part, I can skip all the data dumps people leave in their books, and I'm not missing a thing. So if you're a brand new author trying to get a publisher and they see data dumps, those are so common, they're going to assume that you're a novice and you're not worth putting their time into, and they're going to reject you out of hand just from data dump, which is why they only look for the first 3 pages a lot of times. You'll pick that stuff up. You can pick that stuff up on the first page. But when I help people, they say, well, will you help me fix my writing? I'll do the same thing these days. I'll say, send me 1 chapter of your book, or send me 3 pages. I made the mistake one time of saying, no, I'll do the first 10 pages, or I'll do the first 10 chapters. That was tedious, having to weed through. I only got through 3 chapters of this person's work, and I finally said, look, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. It's my eyes are burning looking at all this stuff. There's so much wrong with it. Take what I've said for the first 3 chapters and apply that to the rest of your manuscript. So I've backed down how much I accept from people when I try and help them just because of this.
Well, you can have them go through this video, your PowerPoint, and to see that. I wanted to ask you about something that I'm not familiar with. You said open your PDF in Acrobat Reader or a web browser, and it has a read aloud feature. I haven't seen this in the web browser.
A lot of times, Edge, I think, has it built in natively now, but it used to be an add-on, what they call an extension that you had to add to your browser to be able to use it. And it was called Read Aloud. That's why I put it in quotes there, because that was the actual name of the program, was Read Aloud. But Microsoft Word, without 365, has a feature you have to add manually. It's called Speak. And you can highlight a certain portion of your words and have it speak to you, but more than a couple pages, then that's too much for its systems, and it doesn't work well. So again, I prefer with the read aloud, it opens up in a small box, and you can see it highlighting the words as it's going through there. So then if you hear something you don't like, you can pause it, go and fix it, and then hit resume and let it continue. And sometimes I'll listen to my book twice or three times before I get it to the point where, okay, I like it. Now I'm going to move on to the next step. That's really the key to these steps, is get it to where you like it, and okay, I'm done with these. There's nothing else left, and then go on to the next step. If you try and race through, you're defeating the whole purpose of trying to edit your book and polish it.
I agree. And the other question was PDF. Does it have to be PDF? Can it read Word or?
In Microsoft 365, it can read in Word. Does it have to be PDF? I think Read Aloud, the browser extension, has to. And if you're going to have Acrobat Reader read it, yeah, it has to be a PDF, because that's what Acrobat Reader reads are PDFs. But again, it's not that hard to get it into a PDF. You can do print to PDF. You can do a save as PDF. It's one of your options in Microsoft Word. In fact, I'm screen sharing just one app, but you can go ahead and pull up Microsoft Word and do a save as on a blank page. You'll see that there's a PDF option for your save as. Same way, probably if you hit print, Windows by default now comes with a print to PDF feature in the Word and other documents. Even on Edge, you can print a web page to PDF. It's common these days to have that listed in the drop-down menus.
That sounds great.
So again, round 2, Grammarly Premium. You do the same thing you did before. After listening to your book, you go through and run Grammarly again. You're not going to have 1,800 problems this time, but you are going to have more problems because you've just, think about what you've done since this. You've removed adverbs. You've gone through and listened to your book and made changes on the fly as you're listening to it. Now it could be disjointed. There could be things you missed. Maybe you didn't remove you thought you highlighted everything from a sentence, but you left one piece from the old sentence and you added something new, so now it doesn't quite make sense. You're going to discover a lot of that. You're going to discover maybe you misspelled a word when you're trying to edit these things. Any major changes you make to your manuscript in one of these steps, run Grammarly through it again before you go to the next step, because you don't want to pile on. Otherwise, you'll get to the end, you'll run Grammarly again, you'll have 1,800 more errors, and it's just going to feed your depression. Don't do that to yourself. Do it in smaller chunks and it won't be quite so bad.
Really? How does hearing your book change the way you spot issues, say, in pacing, flow, and dialogue?
It uses a different sense. We're all given 5 senses, most of us. And again, not everybody, some people are hard of hearing, and that would be a disadvantage to them in this process. But when you listen to it, you're just, I don't know, there's something about it. You're hearing it and experiencing your book in a different way. It helps you to disassociate yourself as an author, because now you're listening to it. You're not necessarily listening to your work. You're listening to a book on audio. It helps. I can't explain why. It helps. I just know it really helps. And when I first heard that suggestion from somebody, I thought, oh yeah, right, whatever. That doesn't work. I'm going to try it just for fun. And I tell you what, after the first chapter, I was like, my goodness, look at how many errors I found, because you're your own worst critic, especially people like me who are ADHD. You're a perfectionist, and it's very hard to hear anything incorrect. But you'll pick up on those dialogue tags. I thought I removed all the dialogue tags, and I listened to my book, and I found some that I'd missed. But I found them because I was listening to it. And a lot of people don't have time to go through this editing process for 6 months. So this is a good way of doing this in the car. You can take the Read Aloud. This is going to cost money, but you can find these programs that will it will read your page and it will transfer it to audio to an MP3 file. And you can separate it by chapter that way. Then you stick it on a USB drive, plug it into your car, and listen to your book as you're driving down the road. Problem with that, I'll caution everybody, you're going to want to make edits while you're driving, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Take your eyes off the road, so don't do that. If you're driving and you're listening to your book and you see a glaring error, pull off the side of the road, write it down, and then get back on the interstate, because you do not want to be having your notepad up here on the steering wheel writing notes as you're trying to avoid traffic going 80 miles an hour. Those two aren't good bedfellows. Now we're finally to the point where we're going to get alpha readers, Laban, not beta readers, alpha readers. And there's a difference here. The alpha reader is someone you know personally, and is someone willing to read your rough draft and give honest feedback. Again, this goes back to what I was saying before, where people would patronize me and say, "Oh, it's a great book, I love it." They were trying to be nice. Don't find a nice person. Find someone who can be a bit of a dink to you, and actually tell you what they think of it, because it's coming from a place of love, that they really want you to succeed, even if they're being critical of it. It's easier, I think, to receive critical feedback from people who like you rather than it is from people who have no stake in your future, because then you can be defensive and say, "Oh, they're just trying to be mean, they don't like me." You get a friend who does it, and suddenly that's more personal to you. And their advice isn't always related to spell checking. They'll find confusing sections of your story or boring sections of narration. Again, don't be defensive. If they say, "Well, this section doesn't make sense," I'll say, "Well, of course it makes sense. Look, it's right here. It's right here. It's right here." Listen, if that doesn't make sense to them, it may not make sense to another reader or to an editor or publisher. You don't want to take that chance. If it's not making sense to them, don't immediately assume that you just have a stupid friend. Look at it and try and figure out what's not making sense to them, and try and rework it to where it does make sense to them. If a portion of the book is boring to them, chances are it's going to be boring to another reader. This is why an alpha reader is so important, because a beta reader won't necessarily give you this level of granularity in your story. They'll read it, or they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to read it," and then they find it, boring or something. They'll say, "Oh, I'm not even going to read it." And so they'll stop reading it, they'll block you on social media, and you'll never get any feedback. So this is why an alpha reader is so important, to get honest feedback and, accept their boundaries too. They may not want to read a book like this. I had a book called Indomitable. It's a historical fiction written in 1838 of an escaped slave who found freedom in Canada. And one of my best friends, Otis, I asked him to read the book, and he said, "I'm sorry," he said, "I can't." He says, I grew up in the 60s, and that was a turbulent time for racism, in the United States. He says, "I can't read a book like that because it would put me in a mindset that I don't want to be in anymore." He says, "I've moved past that mindset. I don't want to go back to that." So I accepted that, and I found someone else who was willing to read it. They're not rejecting you. People have reasons for not wanting to be your alpha reader. So just accept that, and don't be upset with them for doing that, because, at the end of the day, it's their choice to help you. You're not going to force somebody to help you.
I think you spoke about that, because you can save everybody a lot of time by telling your alpha readers, your beta readers, what you want them to look for. Because sometimes it's overwhelming to them. They're like, "Oh, I could be coming on so many things," or, "Oh, I'm having a hard time finding something." Either way, whether you're advanced or whether you're a formative writer, you still need to have some very specific feedback to ask them. The other take is, I had a scene, and I had two alpha readers going through that scene, and I was writing, science fiction fantasy, and it was graphic, and I realized that both writers were traumatized by the scene. Yes, traumatized. The next day, they were freaked out, and I was like, I can't do that to a reader. So sometimes it's not even something that's your standard edit. You just have to realize the impact of your words on other people. So it's really important to have people like that involved in your processes.
Yeah, and that's why I chose the word alpha reader versus beta reader, because they're going to be your first test audience. And again, it goes beyond spell checking and grammar. This is now goes to the heart of your story and the heart of your writing. And you'll have to have a thick skin when you hit this stage. That's for sure. So guess what the next step is? Grammarly. Again, now after they've picked it apart and you've gone in and made all the edits, again, you need to go through and run Grammarly again, because you've made major edit. Don't get discouraged. Every time you run through Grammarly, it'll take you less time, because there's going to be less things to fix, because you've already fixed the 1,800 problems from the first pass. So it's good to keep running through it every time you make major edits or go to a next step, because you'll find things you missed. Now, optionally, choose another editing program at this this point. See if WordRake will choose something different, or Pro Writing Aid, or some other program, and see if they'll find anything different. I made a chart somewhere on these slides where I list all the different top grammar programs and their pros and cons. And you can go through this and you can choose a grammar program that maybe for round 3 that is different than what you've already used. So it'll find different things.
So I'm starting to see part of the value of this is that I need to have a clean manuscript without errors in it. I mean, is that one of the essential elements? Because I'm seeing grammar to come up 3 times.
Yeah, it is. You want a clean manuscript. So many people will send a publisher or an agent a manuscript with errors in it. And again, all they're looking at is the first 3 pages or the first chapter. And if they're seeing all these errors in those, which is supposed to be your pristine chapters, they're going to say, well, what's the rest of the book like? If it's this bad now, do I even want to go through 120 pages? So you've got to make sure that the book is clean, crisp, and tight before you try and send it off to somebody. And that's why I chose all these grammar checkers so many times, because I don't want to miss anything. And again, step 10, listen to your book a second time. You've made a lot of corrections, made a lot of errors, you made a lot of changes. Make sure that everything now flows properly. Again, you may have had a scene that now doesn't work with another scene because you've changed something, but you didn't find all the places where you needed to make that edit. So it's good just to do that and make sure it sounds as good as it looks.
This might take a little bit back here. On this, the alpha readers, should alpha readers be fellow writers, industry professionals, or just avid readers?
I would just do regular readers. My wife is my alpha reader, one of my alpha readers. She reads romance novels. She doesn't read fantasy novels. So this is outside of her comfort zone, but she's my wife, so she's willing to do that. But at the same time, she's just reading it as a reader. She's not going to look for spelling errors. She is a better speller than I am. Funny story about that, I won't go into it. But she's a better speller than I am. So yeah, she may find a word or two, but she basically just reads it to see how it flows. And I know I get that. That's a great thing from her, is just making sure it flows right. And since she doesn't read fantasy, she'll say, well, this doesn't make sense. Okay, well, let me try and make it make sense for someone who doesn't even read fantasy. Because your fantasy fans are going to get it. What happens if somebody likes the cover and they just pick it up? Oh, what's this about? And they start reading it. Or, you choose a publisher who maybe 90% of their stuff is romance, and they're just now breaking out into the fantasy and sci-fi, trying to represent them. So they aren't really familiar with fantasy that much. But you don't want to jar them either. So it's good to have an alpha reader who isn't necessarily a professional and isn't looking just for spelling errors. You can have multiple alpha readers. Some people are better at other things. One of the people that I've used for interviews on Twitter is Mark Schultz, and he is great at finding homonyms. He found some homonyms in Science of Fairy, and I had to go back to my editors and my publisher and say, hey, we found 17 errors in the book. These need to be fixed. And they're like, how do you find these? They skipped my publisher even. And we went through the book for 9 months editing, and they skipped that too. So certain people have different skills. When you find those people, make sure you utilize their skills and their talents. Some people, they're only good at finding different areas of story that don't make sense, and that's fine. Did that answer your question, Laban?
I think it sure does. Thank you very much for that.
So, Laban, now we get to the beta reader step, and notice we're on step 11 at this point. So now a beta reader should be someone who has I say it should be someone who has a personal connection to you. It doesn't have to be. You can pay for beta readers. You can go out to Twitter or Instagram and say, hey, I'm looking for beta readers who wants to beta read the books. Some will require you to pay them to beta read your book. Ignore that. Don't do it. You'll find so many people who are willing to do it for free, or who'll say, hey, I'll beta read your book if you beta read mine. Well, that's a beta read swap. I'll do that too. If I know I've got the time to actually read the book. You can get unfiltered feedback from people who read your genre, but you can also get good feedback from people who don't read your genre. Like I said, my wife, she reads romance novels and mysteries. She does not read fantasy as a rule. So my books are the only fantasy books she ever reads. But on the last one, I wrote it in such a way so that it didn't even sound like a fantasy, except in different, specific little places. But for the most part, it was an action adventure book. So she really liked it better than the others because it was less fantasy and more adventure. But yeah, don't ever pay anybody to read your book. Optionally, you can hire a PR company. I did this for the last time with The Signs of Fairy. It was called Swipe the Book PR. They already have a database filled with beta readers. Now look, I didn't spell grammar check didn't pick this up. A PR company has a data filled with vetted beta readers. It should be database. But I didn't listen to this book. I used my eyes. I used a grammar checker. I used a spell checker. Grammar checker missed this word right here. If I had been listening to this, I would hear a PR company has a data filled with vetted beta readers. Well, my ears would have picked up data filled. That doesn't sound right. So that's where listening to it finds things that your eyes miss. I skipped a step making this slide. So just a good example of why you should listen to your book. Anyway, a PR company has a database filled with readers already. So they'll find people who will not only give you feedback, but they'll post reviews on Amazon and Goodreads. Now, Swipe the Book PR, a lot of the people they chose were from India. So when they left reviews on Amazon's India site. So when you go to Amazon.com, my book only has 2 reviews. Well, that's because I've got about 17 reviews over on the India site. So make sure that the PR company you use tries to find people in your country who will leave reviews, or people who will leave reviews on both Amazon.in and Amazon.com or something like that. If you want those, if you're doing it for the reviews, make sure they do it on the site that you're using. If you don't care about the reviews necessarily, you're just doing it to get beta readers or just doing it to get momentum for your book during a book launch, it doesn't matter who they choose. People in India are just as good as anybody else. Again, this isn't a dig on anybody's country. It's where you're publishing your book. If you're publishing on Amazon.com, having a majority of your reviews on Amazon.in is not conducive to selling your book. That's all I'm saying. The last one then is obtain cultural or sensitivity readers. Now this is one I added when I did Indomitable. So before that, I only had an 11-step. I only had an 11-step editing process, not 12 steps. So I said this is an optional step based on the story you're writing. If your story includes characters of a different gender, nationality, race, religion, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, make sure you get a sensitivity reader. If it's outside of your wheelhouse or outside of anything that you have firsthand knowledge of, you need a sensitivity reader. You need a cultural reader. I'll use Shanae as another example. She lives in Australia or New Zealand, and she's writing a book about her Aussie character who meets someone who is from America. Or she writes another book, The Love Mentalist, where the Love Mentalist is in America doing a book tour in America. If you haven't been to America, if you aren't familiar with the way Americans act or talk, you need people from America to read your book and make sure it all jives. I did the same thing with The Signs of Fairy. My characters were British. It takes place in England. Now, while I have been to Amesbury and the city that this takes place in, and I do watch a lot of British television, I want to make sure that my characters sounded realistic and weren't just spouting slang that nobody actually uses. So I chose some British friends that I knew to read my book and make sure that it sounded authentic. And when I did again Indomitable, I'm writing a story about a black woman in the 1838. Well, I definitely need a sensitivity reader to make sure, especially since I'm talking about slavery at the time, I need to make sure I'm being sensitive to black culture. I also need to make sure I'm being culturally sensitive also, and that I'm not using a cultural stereotype that isn't true, or that I'm being insensitive to their culture. So that was one of the things they found, was that Eliza in that book, she interacts with some Native Americans. Well, she interacts with a female Native American, and I've always heard the word squaw. I thought that's what again, in 1838, I thought that's what term you used. And yes, it is, if it's your character speaking. But as the narrator, you can't use words like squaw. That's offensive to Native Americans. I didn't know that. So again, I was glad I got the sensitivity reader, because I did not mean to offend anybody using the word squaw in narration. That's just what I pick up by reading books in the 1800s. So it's very important to do that. And this is a list then of the grammar tools, the different ones I found, and a step-by-step, side-by-side comparison of all these. We can go through that if you want, or we can talk about the other steps.
I think Grammarly definitely works. So what are your thoughts on, this is kind of the DIY version. Am I interpreting that correctly? That it's not so much, you're not hiring the proofreader, you're not hiring the editor. That's another option, but this is, if you want to do it yourself, is that?
Yes. I hired 2 professional editors over the last, since 2006. I hired 2 professional editors to the tune of $5,000. One was $2,500 and the other was $2,500. And they destroyed my book. They didn't take my author voice into account. They just wrote it the way they would write a book. And I did not like the way they edited it. And every time I made a complaint, they said, well, I'm editing this for you. You're paying me for it. So just accept what I tell you. That's not an attitude to have when you're hiring someone to edit your book. So I was burned. Can't tell you the thousands of dollars I put into this book. I'll never make it all back. But that's okay. It's a labor of love, and I learned a lot along the way. But you can see the prices of these things. Pro Writing Aid. All these things are so much more expensive than Grammarly.
Yes, one suggestion for that, guys, is that, you have them go through your first chapter and you see if you're a match, or you decide to go this route. I mean, it's all on you. So some people some people have difficulty using Grammarly. You can try it, see if it works for you. An editor's another route, and the proofreader, as he pointed out, is very useful. And there are different price ranges for editors, but I believe that you had a very, very long book. Am I right?
It really wasn't. It's 283 pages. Again, I had to split it up a lot because editors and publishers told me that the book was too long. So now I have 4 books in a series that was originally designed to be a standalone novel that are about 280 to 300 pages each.
Okay, so a lot of times, at least I've read this many times, that more than 100,000 words for a brand new author is considered kind of it's a red flag. And I don't know if you remember how many words, but what is your recommendation for length of a book?
It depends on your genre. I know that I believe romance is 60 to 80,000 words. Fantasy is 80 to 100,000 words. An epic fantasy could go as high as 120,000 words. I know that when I edit, I'm going to pull stuff out. So I try to get my book up to about 100,000 words. And then when I know it, when I'm doing my edits, that drops down. The Science of Fairy, I believe, was 83,000 words completed, so it just barely fit in the genre category, or I would have had to add another chapter. But I edited so much out of it.
Well, I think going on the lower side is probably a little bit easier. They could say add this, add that, but when it's too big, they might have a problem with that.
Yeah. One of the other things I could share, I have a side-by-side comparison. This is my book I originally wrote called Brander, before I renamed it to The Science of Fairy. Now, I'm not going to read everything here. I mean, it's 9 pages long, 5,000 words, because it's both the prologue of this book and the same scene with The Science of Fairy. But you see here, I started out, Ian woke in the midst of an ancient forest. Okay, that's not a good hook. You're starting out, okay, he's dreaming. You know that right away. Again, look at all the data dumps here. Trees towered over him. He stood up, he looked around. There's that word, looked. I'm trying to be descriptive here. His blonde hair. The branches creaked ominously. There's some adverbs for you. The dangling moss dance wildly. Ian thought. Well, now I'm getting into telling rather than showing. There's so much here. And if the publisher or agent were to read this, they'd look at it and think, okay, well, where's the dialogue? Where's the suspense? He's looking around, scanning the trees. He looked up. Instead of gazed into the canopy of trees, he says he looks up and all I can see is a canopy of trees. Turns around slowly. Adverbs. Just continues on. There's no dialogue yet. We're a page in, and it's still just a data dump. It's still going. And finally, we're down page and a quarter. It says a voice spoke out, I wouldn't touch that if I were you. Here's your dialogue tag. You're a Pegasus. He blurted out suddenly. Oh, do I need that? He blurted out suddenly? I mean, that he's blurting out.
Yeah, it's like suddenly, that's what a blurt is.
So why would you put that in there? You're telling the reader something they already know? You can easily replace this with some narrative action. This can't be real, he chided himself. I've already got it in italics. I know he's thinking it. Why am I saying he's chiding himself silently? Again, adverb, catching your dialogue tag. It's just, you go through it and I just cringe when I when I read this. Who said that? Ian demanded. Who's talking to me? I was notorious for adding a dialogue tag in between to split up my conversation, my dialogue. That way people would know who is speaking. The Pegasus looked at him. Okay, well, that's exciting right there, isn't it? Again, this is me picking it apart, being mean to myself. But this is the way an editor or publisher would look at it. They give a snort of derision reading through this. He sneered. I had words here that, Geirin instead of Garen, because I was trying to use old Irish words and people couldn't pronounce them. So this is something that my alpha reader found. Is like, man, I can't pronounce any of these words. So I Americanized the words. I changed it from Geirin to Garen so people could pronounce it easier. Anyway, it goes through. This did not change. This is the one part of my book that it changed a little bit, but for the most part, this has stayed the same throughout everything. This one, instead of the word Eileen, this is how you pronounce it, Eileen, but no one could pronounce that, so I changed that to suddenly. It just anyway, I'm just going through. You can see all this stuff. It's basically just him. Then he wakes and looks at the ceiling. Oh, it was just a dream. To me, this is boring. But that's how my prologue originally was stripped down. And I only included this one section. Like I said, my prologue was about 11 pages long. This is one section. I took this and I added it to chapter 6 of the Science of Fairy. But instead of having it as a dream, Ian was actually watching his memories unfold before him. He'd been sucked into a magic book, and his memories were being replayed almost like you're on a holodeck at Star Trek. And, no. And then Ian howled in despair, flinging himself through Turok's fading vision. That's not a dialogue tag. That is narration right there. He landed on the solid floor, his body racked with sobs. Why'd they have to die? What did they ever do to Turok? So no one mentions his parents' death. Here is my data dump. It's not a data dump now. I've taken everything that could have been a data dump. I've put it into one or two sentences. No one mentions his parents' death, the vision of their murder. Again, I'm referring back now to the prologue without having to go into all that detail by doing these couple of sentences. So then you're saying, I'm sorry, Ian. Then you're doing action. Instead of Robert said, you're saying, Robert placed a comforting hand on Ian's shoulder. I wrote about their exit from Fairy. See, I've taken that dialogue tag and I've changed it now. So you're seeing some action happen. You're showing the reader what's happening rather than saying he said something. So as you're going through this, they ask what the dream was like. So he says, another strange thing about the dream, we were in a countryside, you weren't with me. Then I remembered the ruins. I stepped forward and it says, I closed my eyes, I stretched my arms out, trust my memory more on sight. That was almost verbatim from the other one, but that was from a data dump, not the character speaking and relating his dream. So I took the scene, I just twisted it around. And you have conversation now. Oh, what did the stone look like? So then he was able to describe the stone. And, can you describe Fairy? And you can see I don't have any, you look through this, you're not finding any adverbs, you're not finding dialogue tags. And I think it just, people were able to relate more with Ian as they're going through this. He averted his eyes as you're called in the next memory. So now Ian's troubled by this. He's emotionally compromised. All by saying he averted his eyes as you're called in the next memory, you can see that. You kind of feel for him because what's happening. He's seen his mother who's dead, and he's recalling these painful memories again. Anyway, a lot of this is just conversation. You can see what's happening through here. This is
definitely stronger and more action-packed. We had a comment from a viewer who was asking about the poetry when it comes in the prose. Yeah. How are we supposed to read it? With pauses in a poetic way? Or just normal reading? So here's the poem here. Seek me in the hidden city, coming at quick and pace. This is, I just read it all as one. And I separated it and put it, you notice it's centered, it's in italics, it stands out on the page. And that's how I separated it. So it's not really following the formula, because I'm using this almost as dialogue. Because notice here he says, he removed it from its wrappings, placed it on the palm of his hand. Immediately, the amulet began to glow, and a beautiful musical voice emanated from within. So now, the musical voice is emanating from within. This is speaking. This is dialogue. So you would read it as dialogue. And if you look down here, I think somewhere. No, I don't have it in here. At some point, I
I had the vision. It must have been the previous chapter where I mentioned the same poem. So I try not to do a lot of retelling, where I read the poem once and then I'm not going to bring that entire poem back. I'll say, you remember from the poem when they said this line, and then you bring the one line out. That's what I did. Does that answer the question?
Oh, yes. You read it like dialogue. And I guess kind of a mystical dialogue, I think I would, because you said it had musicality in it.
Yeah.
So you've taken us through, is this the full 12 steps here, the 12-step program?
It is. This is the full 12 steps.
Okay, so this is wonderful, and they responded. Let's see, they said yes, thank you, and answered their question. And so you're talking about the grammar tools now.
Yeah, this is a more in-depth discussion on the grammar tools. Which one's right for you? It really depends on what you're looking for. I kind of give a breakdown of what all the benefits are. I remember I said in step 3, maybe choose a different grammar tool. This is where this would come in. I use Grammarly. That doesn't mean that Grammarly is going to be the best for everybody. Based on your writing style and based on what you're writing, like Quillbot is best for paraphrasing and academic writing. I would not use Quillbot in a fantasy novel. But if I was writing an academic paper, maybe I'd use Quillbot. So you want to make sure that you're using the grammar checker that's best for your work. WordBreak, good for business and legal professionals.
I think I used Hemingway, and I was impressed with it, but I forget if it's integrated with Word.
I break that down in the side-by-sides here. So Hemingway, one-time fee of $20, free web version available. It has a desktop app and a web-based app. No plagiarism checkers, though. No rephrasing tools. It's best for readability improvement, including concise writing. Does offer readability analysis.
Well, what I was impressed with about it is because Hemingway, he didn't use a lot of the adjectives and so forth. And so it might be good for our first pass through if you know that you've been using a lot of adverbs and you're just looking for another way to be more concise. Especially if you're an advanced writer, I think you might appreciate Hemingway.
And this is what I tell people all the time when I give them my 12-step process. This is what worked for me. Use it as a guide, but don't necessarily, follow it like the Bible. It's different for everybody. Find your author voice. That's what's most critical. And maybe through this process, you can develop your writing voice and your author voice and learn how to write in your own style. But, use this as a guide. If you don't want to do a step, skip a step. It's your book. If you'd rather use Quillbot or Hemingway than Grammarly, use those products. Whatever you want to do, these are just, suggestions. So that's all I do is offer suggestions.
Well, I would say the one to not go without would be Grammarly. Do you agree? Like, if you had to recommend one?
If I had to recommend one, I would recommend Grammarly. I haven't used these 4 here, Quillbot, Ginger, Hemingway, or WordTune. I just looked up what the most popular ones were. I have used all 4 of these, and I love Grammarly the most. WordBreak was my second favorite. Autocrit, they told me that I would upload it to their server, the entire book, and it crashed their server. They said, oh, your book's too long. You have to upload it 1 chapter at a time. It's like, I've got 37 chapters. I'm not uploading this like 1 chapter at a time. Don't you have a desktop app? Nope, we're web only. It's like, well, guess what? I'm not going to renew your service. WordBreak, you have to pay for a year at a time or a lifetime subscription to it. There is no free version to try. It's if you want to use it and even try it to see if you like it, you have to pay them $129. Well, a lot of people don't have that to spend on a product that they've never used before. I did. It was okay. It found a lot of things Grammarly didn't, but again, it's more for legal writing, so it made my writing very stiff and formal. It didn't allow for the creative author voice that I'd created. Pro Writing Aid was probably the best one of the outside of Grammarly. It integrates everywhere. It's for fictional writers and academic writers alike, and it has a lot of the same a lot of the same features as Grammarly. So if I were to recommend something outside of Grammarly, I'd say Pro Writing Aid.
Okay, those are great recommendations. And so I think we're on the same page with this. One of the most important things that a person can do, a writer can do, to make sure that their writing is viable in any marketplace is to make sure that you are editing the work, whether it's DIY, like he's been showing you how to do here, where you hire somebody to do it. Do not send your words out into the world without other eyes or AI into that process. Because if you send out a book into the world without editing it very well, what's going to happen is that people are going to hate it. And they're going to make horrible comments in the reviews, and it's going to be devastating. And so the best thing you can do is wrap your book up in a beautiful package, which is quality. Provide a quality product. And so JD has outlined something that I am totally on board with as an editor, as a lifelong reader, as a teacher of English. In every which way, I am endorsing what he has proposed here as a method to make your work commercially viable. And so go back through this. This is the type of thing to review more than one time. And if he develops this into a master class, you definitely want to take it and take your time with it and really learn it once very well.
I've actually incorporated this into my writing style. So now when I write books, I write without adverbs. I write without dialogue tags. And I've learned to do that. And still, sometimes when I'll slip through and I'll go back and fix it real fast. But one of the things I also want to caution people about is don't edit while you write if you can keep from it. Just get it down on paper, then go back and edit it. If you try and edit while you write, you'll end up like George R. R. Martin. That's what he does. He edits while he writes. And look where Winds of Winter is. 13 years, 16 years later, he still hasn't finished it yet. So don't.
I say the same thing. I say don't do it. I say write straight through. It's the best thing you can do. Editing is very time consuming. In its own right, it's a different part of your brain, and so the writing is best done separately. That said, I'll finish a chapter. I try to write a chapter that day, and then the next day when I come in, I need to reread the previous chapter because I need to be in sync with where I was the day before. And when I do that, if I see anything that's really glaring, then I'll make an edit there. But I don't put my heart into it at that moment.
I know you talked about this process that you came up with, which is basically the 12-step process. Now, is there any way that if a writer wanted to focus on 3 steps from this 12-step editing process, what would these 3 steps be?
I would say removing your adverbs dialogue tags. I'd make that a step in and of itself because adverbs are so much tied to dialogue tags. You remove the adverbs, your dialogue tag is going to fall flat. So I'd make that a step in and of itself. I'd definitely go through and have at least one of your grammar checkers read through it. And then I'd either do the alpha readers or I would listen to it. I lean more toward listening to it because, you may not get an alpha reader. You may not have someone you can trust like that. You can always trust yourself. You can trust your own ears. So I guess those would be the top 3 steps. Remove your adverbs and dialogue tags, run a grammar checker, and then listen to it.
Sounds good.
A reader had commented, and I'm just going to summarize it because it's kind of long, but they speak another language, and English is the second language, so they're speaking in Urdu, and they write really long, she says, in her native language, but when she's using the editing tools, she's finding that it's trying to simplify and, I guess, shorten, make it shorter than in her native tongue. So she's saying, do you have any tip that I can keep my original native tone and style while writing in English, or should I need to adapt the English language writing style?
That's kind of tricky because you don't want to destroy your author voice. You have a unique voice. I'd say as long as you're being consistent, throughout the whole book that way, it should be okay. But again, you have to look at who your audience is. If your audience are going to be English-speaking readers, they may not understand the nuances of Urdu and the long sentences. I use as a rule never to have more than 30 words in a sentence. If it's more than 30 words, I'll try and split it up somehow. To me, that's too long of a sentence to grasp. Maybe something like that would help. Putting a limit to the number of words you put in your sentences and just try to keep consistent on that limit.
And Laban had responded to that as well. Laban, what was your take on that?
It was pretty much what you just said. You don't have to lose the original voice of whatever language you're writing in. Some languages may be simple like English. Yeah, you don't have to go for that. You can balance that with, very strategically using dashes, ellipses, that kind of way, so that you do not lose the originality and the message and the voice in your writing, so to speak.
I agree. We do have to keep our culture. And so as writers, we do preserve our culture. And I mean, how do people know our time period? Because we write about it. And even when we're writing science fiction, fantasy, we're telling something about our culture by the way that we tell the story. But there is one thing I would add. So when I'm editing and I comment on something like this to a writer, I'll say, I am reading this sentence in my mind, but I'm still breathing. And what happens is there's this connection between breath and reading. When a sentence is too long, you feel like, even if you're not reading it aloud, there's this feeling like I'm running out of breath. And so that's that 30 word is a good tactic. If we keep our sentences shorter, then people don't run out of breath and they can stay with us better because they're having to chunk our information. So the more words that we cram into it, the harder it is for them to figure out what we're saying. So guys, we've run really well. JD, was there anything you wanted to say before we close out?
No, not really. Just, thank you for having me. And it was a pleasure to be here and to share the editing process with your group.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to the first Cozy Book Nook Zoom with me, Christina Goebel, and
JD Edwards.
Laban
M'mbololo, Esquire.
And if you value this time with JD Edwards, leave comments here in Zoom or on YouTube when it's available there. You may follow JD on X as @BerryRounds. Stay tuned for our next Cozy Book Nook Zoom author interview. And you can still find the original Cozy Book Nook on X Spaces each Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. Thanks again to you, JD, for sharing some of the most important information that any writer can come across and for your service to others. Stay cozy, friends.